Hi guys, Olive here today to bring you a very exciting video. In today's video, I would like to tell you about my top 5 nonfiction reads of 2017. Very quickly before we begin, I would like to say that these books are ranked, so you will see my number 1 pick, my very favorite nonfiction book of the year, at the end of the video. I would also like to say that these are simply the books that I have read during the calendar year of 2017. This is not necessarily the year that they were published. So without any further ado, in the number 5 spot is How Music Got Free, The End of an Industry, The Turn of the Century, and the Patient Zero of Piracy by Stephen Witt. This is not a book I expected to be on this list. In fact, if you would have told me when I was selecting this book as somewhat of a throwaway pick, as something I selected because I needed an audiobook and didn't have one going at the moment, that it would end up on my favorite nonfiction reads of 2017 list, I would have called you a damn liar. But for a few different reasons, this book definitely earned its spot on this list. This book tells the story of the music industry in the early 2000s and how it was affected by the invention of the MP3 file and the growth of digital piracy in the early days of the internet. But really, it was the storytelling of this book that made it so memorable for me. I listened to the entire audiobook in one day because I just couldn't tear myself away from listening to it. It's one of those pieces of nonfiction that reads like fiction because I was so invested in all of the individuals that Witt introduces into the story. How their individual stories all interweave to create the overall narrative was completely compelling, and I must admit that it was intensely cool to be reading about a time period and a movement that I felt very close to during those years. Coming in at number 4 is Cannibalism, A Perfectly Natural History by Bill Schutt. This is a fun, if slightly macabre, history of the taboo practice of cannibalism in both the animal kingdom and in human society. In this book, the author details the variety of reasons why cannibalism may take place in the animal kingdom. He talks about where the taboo against cannibalism may have started in human culture, and he discusses some well-known cases of cannibalism. It feels really weird to say this, but this was actually a really fun read. Bill Schutt repeatedly resists the easy temptation to go down the path of sensationalism, and instead wrote a really engaging and informative read that will only occasionally turn your stomach. He uses fun illustrations and dad jokes to soften the subject matter, but at no point does he dumb anything down. It is the most well-done presentation of an unsavory topic that I could have ever imagined. If you would like to hear more of my thoughts on this book, I did a full drunk review of this book in early 2017. I have also recently recommended this book on a horror podcast called Books in the Freezer, which was all about gruesome nonfiction. Rachel and Stephanie, the hosts of Books in the Freezer, were kind enough to have me on as a guest on their podcast. So if you would like to listen to that, I will also leave a link to it down below. Coming in at spot number 3 is I Contain Multitudes, The Microbes Within Us and a Grander View of Life by Ed Yong. This was one of my nonfiction November reads, and I was bursting with excitement the entire time I read it because I am, in fact, a giant nerd. This book is all about the countless number of microbes that live both in our bodies and around us. We all know about the harmful types of microbes that cause illness, bacteria, but in fact, the vast majority of microbes are critical, or at the very least helpful, in the functioning of our bodies and of the bodies of other living things. The subtitle of this book is 100% correct in that it really does give you a grander view of life. The fact that so many functions of our bodies have behind the scenes help from these microorganisms that we can't even see, the way that we and every other living creature on Earth have evolved alongside these microorganisms to create millions of symbiotic relationships, it's amazingly cool. Plus, this book is amazingly approachable in its subject matter and presents it in such an engaging, entertaining way. You must pick it up if you're interested in science or want to get into science. Coming in at number 2 is The Man Without a Face, The Unlikely Rise of Vladimir Putin by Masha Gessen. This book is both a history of Putin's life and his rise to power, but is also an attempt to figure Putin out, to put a face on him, to extrapolate Putin's motives and underlying agenda, specifically from his behaviors between 2000 and 2012. On the world stage, Putin can often seem a mysterious figure, and his actions can often seem to be nonsensically aggressive. He came out of nowhere and was suddenly the most powerful man in Russia without anyone knowing anything about his past or who he was as a person. These are questions that have persisted, leaving Russia and its ruler to be the same riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma that it ever was to the outside world. But Masha Gessen pulls the curtain back and reveals what is currently known about Putin, and fills in some blanks using some educated guesses. She details how he stumbled into power and what he's done with it since acquiring it. Gessen's writing is extremely approachable, and she expertly crafts this story, very likely due to her background in journalism. I think everyone could gain something from reading this, to get a clear picture of Putin's very unlikely rise to power, but also to get Masha Gessen's commentary on who Putin is and what he wants, which I personally felt to be spot on. I am definitely planning on reading more of Masha Gessen's books in 2018. And my number one favorite nonfiction book of 2017 is Being Mortal, Medicine and What Matters in the End by Atul Gawande. This book was destined to become my top nonfiction read of the year, since it has already earned its place on my top 10 nonfiction books of all time list. This book was written by surgeon Atul Gawande and explores aging, death, and how medicine plays a role in both of those things. He discusses the changing attitudes that Western society has possessed about aging, and how evolving household structures has made aging ever more difficult and expensive. He moves on to discussions of nursing homes and assisted living facilities, and ends with a very earnest yet honest questioning of this very American fight it with all your might approach to end-of-life care. What is special about this book is that it is this man, Atul Gawande, a surgeon, a man of science, taking an almost physical step back from what must feel like an instinctual urge to attack all medical problems with all the medicine you possibly can. He entirely removes himself from this urge and presents the case that sometimes doing nothing but simply easing suffering is exactly the right prescription at the end. But make no mistake, he presents this case gently and with all the reverence that it is due. He even goes so far as to discuss his own experience with losing his father, which makes this book such a more personal and non-patronizing experience. And the book as a whole also gives you very clear and direct advice about how to speak to your loved ones, about what they would want for the end of their lives if they're not able to choose that for themselves. I found it to be thought-provoking, moving, and instructive. It will be a book that I use to help me through hard times in the future, and a book that I will use to help prepare myself for the griefs and the hardships that are simply a part of these complicated lives that we lead. So those were my top 5 nonfiction reads of the year. I would love to hear from you in the comment section below if you've read any of these, if you've heard of them, or if you're now interested in reading them now that you've heard me talk about them, or if you have anything else you would like to chat with me about, you can also put that in the comment section below, but you can also find me on a variety of different places on social media. The links to all of my profiles are linked in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.